The U.S. House of Representatives has overwhelmingly passed a resolution lashing out at Russia over its foreign policies.
Resolution strongly condemning the actions of the Russian Federation under President Vladimir Putin, which has carried out a policy of aggression against neighboring countries aimed at political and economic domination.
The language of the non-binding document has been widely equated by critics to that of a Cold War-style rhetoric. RT's Guyane Chichikan now assessing the diplomatic falling out between America and Russia.
President Biden and I have been saying, and that is, we want to reset our relationship.
Let's do it together.
So we will do it together, okay?
In a matter of a few years, U.S.-Russia relations went from this
Today, the Cold War is over.
to President Obama putting Russia in a group with Ebola and ISIS in his ranking of international threats.
We're leading and dealing with Ebola in West Africa and in opposing Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
How did we get here? In 2011, when Russia did not oppose the UN Security Council resolution to protect civilians in Libya, Moscow did not expect that the NATO operation would result in Colonel Gaddafi's killing.
As we came, we saw, he died.
Soon afterward, Russia and the US found themselves at loggerheads over Syria, with Moscow opposing a military intervention. America's interference during the Ukrainian uprising last year seemed to have caught Moscow by surprise.
Scandal brewing as Washington's real stance on Ukraine may have leaked on the web. An alleged phone conversation between U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and the U.S. Ambassador to the Ukraine. What did the two allegedly discuss?
Well, what you hear these two high U.S. officials discussing is literally putting members of the Ukrainian opposition, moving them around like as if they were playing chess, on how to configure a new government in Ukraine. The U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Payette, and the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, Victoria Nuland, were trying to figure out who would fit best in what position. They said that one of the opposition leaders, Yatsenyuk, is the guy with the economic experience and the best governing experience, that he's the guy that should be on the inside. When they spoke about keeping the moderate Democrats together, they also spoke about the fact that they need something to make their plan stick. Once a new government is formed, if it starts gaining altitude, they need some kind of symbolism, be it a UN figure to come into Ukraine, give a nod to it. They say if that doesn't happen, they said that the Russians could come in and torpedo any plans the U.S. is now putting in place for the new Ukrainian government.
And was there anything else significant in the recording?
There was another significant, probably the most controversial part of the recording is when they were discussing an international personality to come out and quote unquote midwife this thing. They said that they'd rather have a UN official come in and help glue this thing together, and then Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State to the U.S., made a very controversial comment about her European allies. Let's take a listen.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, fuck the EU.
Spokesperson for the State Department, Jen Psaki, was fielding many questions at a press briefing earlier on Thursday. She said she insisted that Ms. Nuland actually apologized to someone in the European Union for the comments that she made. Let's take a listen.
She's been in close contact with EU High Representative Ashton. Also, let me convey that she has been in contact with her EU counterparts and of course, has apologized. But
She apologized.
For these reported comments, of course.
So you're not confirming that the comments are accurate?
I'm just not going to speak to a private diplomatic conversation, Arshad, but I'm obviously speaking to the content of the reports.
Is the United States intervening in Ukraine in any way, arming protesters or otherwise doing anything to help in that conflict?
We have been playing a direct role in urging the government to refrain from violence and to sit down and work with the opposition You know, because it's been read out, that the Vice President has had a number of phone calls with President Yanukovych. And we're committed to working with both the government and the opposition to help de-escalate this crisis so that the Ukrainian people themselves can decide their own future. We condemn violence by any party in Ukraine, and Russian officials should be doing the same. Nonviolence has been the hallmark of the main protest and opposition leaders, and we support that. And we believe that part of the discussion has to be an acceptance by the government that peaceful protest needs to be allowed, and that is a fundamental principle of participatory democracies. So the answer is, the assistance we've provided has been consultation with both sides, urging them to de-escalate the crisis.
You mentioned Russian officials. Kremlin aide essentially accused Washington today of intervening, of arming the rebels. Are there any? My question is,
the opposition movement has been peaceful, and they're peaceful protests. That is the hallmark of this opposition. So I don't know honestly what he's talking about.
Is the White House aware of a video that's been posted on YouTube that apparently has a conversation between a State Department official and the U.S. ambassador talking about a future Ukraine government and using a fairly colorful expletive about the EU?
Well, I've seen reports about it. I think the State Department obviously is aware of it. We don't discuss private diplomatic conversations. It's certainly no secret that our ambassador and Assistant Secretary have been working with the government of Ukraine, with the opposition, with business and civil society leaders to support their efforts to find a peaceful solution through dialogue and political and economic reform. Ultimately, it's up to the Ukrainian people to decide their future. Brianna.
Do you think the call may be real?
Well, I would refer you to the State Department. I mean, I think that Assistant Secretary Nuland has been in contact with her EU counterparts, and relations with the EU are stronger than ever. And there's no question that we are working, Assistant Secretary Nuland, who has a lot of experience in this area, and our ambassador in Ukraine, with the opposition and with the government to try to help de-escalate the crisis.
How concerned are you that a phone call like this could be out there? It's supposed to be private conversation, very candid conversation, it appears, between diplomats.
Well, if you're talking about profanity.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about, I mean, they're speaking
well, look,
I'm actually not talking about the profanity.
So you're just talking about?
Well, I mean, for instance, Victoria Nuland in the call appears to prefer one opposition candidate over another, saying she doesn't think it's a good idea that a certain...
Well, I'm not going to comment on the content of private diplomatic conversations. I would say that
it's not private
since
anymore. What's your concern?
the video was first noted and tweeted out by the Russian government, I think it says something about Russia's role, but the content of the conversation is not something I'm going to comment on.
Are you saying Russia tapped this phone call?
I'm not. I'm just noting that they tweeted it out.
What does it say about their role? Sorry.
Refer you to the State Department.
Private conversation now does appear to be public. Is that really the stance that a diplomat should be taking?
Again, I'm not going to discuss
favoring one candidate over another?
I'm not going to discuss the conversation, Brianna. What I can tell you is that the Assistant Secretary and our ambassador and others have been working with the opposition, with the government, with business and civic leaders in Ukraine to help de-escalate the crisis, and because that's in Ukraine's best interests and in the best interests of the Ukrainian people.
A leaked phone call reveals the same snipers were shooting at both protesters and police in Kiev. Well, Marina, do tell us where we know this from and who was behind those snipers, Dan.
Absolutely. Well, all this information is in fact becoming public after a phone conversation was leaked and is now accessible to everyone who wants to listen in, and it is on YouTube. And that conversation, in fact, is between the EU Foreign Chief Catherine Ashton, and also we have the Estonian Foreign Affairs Minister. And Catherine Ashton, in that phone conversation, is in fact asking him about his impressions of Ukraine, where he just returned from, and he said the picture is looking sad, and more importantly, and it's quite an eye eye-opener. This one is the fact that snipers were, as you said, Marina, were shooting both at protesters and officials, both sides really. So let's listen in to what he had to say.
All the evidence shows that people who were killed by snipers from both sides, among policemen and people from the streets, that they were the same snipers killing people from both sides.
Well,
So that, and then she also showed me some photos. She said that has medical doctor. She can, say that it is the same handwriting, the same type of bullets, and it's really disturbing that now the new coalition that they don't want to investigate what exactly happened, so that there is now stronger and stronger understanding that behind snipers it was not Yanukovych, but it was somebody from the new coalition.
Я сама готова сейчас брать автомат, понимаешь, и идти стрелять этому в лоб. Блин, надо брать оружие в руки и идти мочить этих, кацапов чертовых вместе с их руководителем.
Я скажу тебе.
Просто жалею, что я не могу сейчас находиться там, и что я не возглавляла все эти процессы, и они у меня Крым получили. Я бы нашла, как замочить этих. И я надеюсь, что я включу все свои связи, и я подниму весь мир, как только смогу, для того, чтобы, просто от этой России не осталось даже выжженного поля.
Ну, я тебе скажу, что я, конечно, тебе здесь союзник, не просто союзник. И я хочу тебе сказать, что вот мы сегодня говорили, а что, это утром было совещание глав фракций, и потом я с Виктором говорил, Витя говорит, а что теперь делать оставшимся 8 миллионам русских, которые остались на территории Украины? Они же изгои.
Их расстреливать из атомного оружия.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. Jim, and then Kristen.
Since the Russian storyline has been that the CIA has been orchestrating the Ukrainian unrest on the western side, was it a wise idea to send the CIA director to Ukraine over the weekend? Was that wise to do?
Well, assertion of fiction doesn't, hold water regardless of who we send or who visits Ukrainian government officials anymore. The implication that Russians have made associated with that visit would be how does that make sense when we have meetings and consultations at that level and between the intelligence services of the United States and Russia, as well as many other countries. So one of the fascinating things to watch, I think, for many of us, especially those of us who have some experience with the former Soviet Union and Russia, is the kind of propaganda efforts that have gone into here, have been an aspect of this situation in Ukraine. Most of the world is not buying these kinds of propaganda, but they are what they are.
But when certainly for the impartial observer, it's pretty easy to see that Russia is indeed supporting these militias you speak of. But don't you add credence to some of their assertions, not about Russian citizens or ethnic Russians being attacked, but about the start of the unrest there when there was an uprising, when the Russians have been blaming that uprising all along on the CIA, and then we send the CIA director there at this particular time.
Jim, I think it's important for everyone who reports on this to apply their critical faculties to that kind of assertion. There is no factual basis for those assertions. Zero, none, because they're not true. And what is true is what many of your news organizations have been reporting about what's been happening on the ground in Ukraine. The nature and makeup of the paramilitary groups that have taken action in Ukraine. Apparently, according to independent media reports, in Ukraine. Those are incontrovertible facts. And I think it's important to separate them from, baseless assertions.